Hello everyone, welcome to the Getting Started guide for the procedural first-person toolkit. In this first part, we'll be implementing the following result that you're currently seeing on your screen. We'll be utilizing the first-person shooter template to integrate with the plugin. Ultimately, we'll have a customizable weapon sway and offset, aim offset, and the plugin's base already configured. In part 2, we'll be delving a bit deeper into this. Stay tuned. Alright, before you create the project, please ensure that you have installed the plugin in the specific version of Unreal Engine that you will be using. For my demonstration, we will be using version 5.7.2. However, the plugin does also provide support for Unreal Engine 5.6. I will be creating a brand new project utilizing the first-person template built completely in Blueprint. I will be selecting the Arena Shooter variant. Once it's open, there is a very important thing that we absolutely need to do before anything else. Unfortunately, the shooter template comes with a very simple mannequin instead of the more advanced one that has all the bones of the Unreal Engine. So unfortunately, we won't be able to fully take advantage of the precise weapon positioning that is present in the animations they've included here. For example, here we can see that there's only Mani Simple and Queen Simple, which are meshes that don't have some of the extra bones, the specific ones that we actually need. However, the original skeleton, it does have these bones. Still, we need the original skeleton. We can see here that there are several bones that are disconnected, with this small gray ball indicating, and a bone that will be quite useful for us. For us, it's this weapon R. The ideal would be for him to be present, which isn't the case. So I'm going to quickly import the Manny's original mesh. If you don't have any projects with it, feel free to use the link provided in the description. Make sure the skeleton is selected, then click import. Sure. Pressures, I will be deleting these materials and physics assets that are no longer necessary. Following this, please confirm that the bones are present. You can see here that the weapon art is now indicated by this bean, showing that it is present. So the animations will work. I also like to set this mesh as the preview mesh for the entire skeleton. You just need to go to the skeleton, select it in the preview settings tab, and then apply. To confirm, simply select the rifle idle animation. Check to see if it's moving along the animation. This indicates that it's being animated. Now let's enable the plugin. Search for procedural first person and then activate it. You will then need to restart the engine. Once the plugin is installed, you can download the demo by right-clicking and selecting Run Editor Utility. You'll then be redirected to a Google Drive link to download the project files. However, in this tutorial, we won't be using it. I'll be implementing it from scratch within the Unreal Engine template. First, we're going to configure our skeleton. Navigate to the skeleton, right-click on it, then select Scripted Asset Actions, and finally, Set up Skeleton. You will find 3 distinct options there. The final one is completely optional. The first option is also optional. However, I strongly recommend that you enable the first one. Yes, the first one. We will be using a single wheeled setup, which means we will only have one pivot point for holding the weapon. In the future, we plan to implement support for the example project with all-wheeled functionality. I will only mark the first 2 of them. Let's take a closer look. Here we can observe the bones that were generated within the hands, and also the bones designed to execute the procedural movements. They will be children of the head bone. I'll be using this map, so I'll change the game mode to shooter. This way, we'll have shooter functionalities. To pick up a weapon, I'll place a pickup here, grab the pickup, drag it.
You just go select the rifle. From this moment, we can collect it.
First off, we're going to organize the animations. We won't be making use of all of these animation blueprints. We'll only be utilizing a single one, and the first person mesh will be copying its movements. It will be a mix of true first person with dual mesh. When opening the rifle, we can see it's using the FP weapon. Let's switch to FP copy. Ele está usando de forward presentation. Open FP copy, it's right here in this folder, engine remove the control rig. We won't be utilizing it. This will be the animation blueprint that's going to be used for all first person meshes. Therefore, I'll replace the use of this animation blueprint in all weapons. The rifle is using FP copy. Pistol change from FP pistol to FP copy. The launcher switch from FP weapon to FP copy. The result should be a bit different now, perhaps a little worse. This is exactly the same output as the third person mode. We need to fix this. The animation blueprint that we will be using as our base will be the ABP TP rifle. We're going to rename it to ABP weapon. Feel free to delete the others. We won't be using them. It's being referenced in some BPs. We'll check. Here we need to switch from ABP TP pistol to our ABP weapon. Now it's referenced in the shooter weapon base. We'll change it to use FP copy and ABP weapon by default.
Now we can take them away.
We need to go and check this out right now. It looks like we're still getting the exact same result as before. Now please proceed to open the ABP weapon program. Here, in the anim graph, we can observe the logic. Let's go ahead and correct this. We will not be needing the animation-based end offset. For layer blend per bone, it is correctly utilizing spline 0.1, but the rotation blend needs to be set to mesh space, not local space. Otherwise, its spine will be twisted, as we can clearly see. Select it, then put the animation back. We can see it's a little straighter now. It's a little more aligned. Here I'll switch to a single frame animation because in first person it doesn't look it's not really suitable to use an animation as a pose. This will make the animation freeze, but we'll improve this. Now let's make some adjustments to the character's blueprint. It's found in this location. We're going to swap our mesh for the one we imported. SKM money and our weapon. The first person mesh can remain as simple, that's fine. The camera, we're going to need to reset its position. It's a little bit too far forward. We don't want that. Set everything to 0. The scales, it doesn't matter. I'll also be adjusting the field of view as we might notice some issues when using a different field of view in first person. So I'll be setting both to 90. A little better. Now let's change how the weapon is attached to the character. We'll modify the way the attachment is performed. Just look for attach weapon meshes right here. We're going to swap handy grip for VB pivot. Same thing for the other mesh. The result is going to be a little bit worse, and that's completely expected. We're going to create some configuration variables for the weapon, shooter weapon base. I'll be creating 3 new configuration variables. The first one is origin relative rotation, which ought to be utilized to correct the orientation of the weapons. Another important variable is attach relative rotation. This specific value should be employed to modify the weapon's placement in the hand, for instances where the animation doesn't fully adjust the weapon's positioning, which is precisely the situation with this template. And finally, we have attach relative location, which shares the same concept as rotation, but for the actual location. We are going to leave everything empty. Click this button to expose instance editable. Now, returning to the animation blueprint, we'll go to the event graph and we're going to save a reference to our BP shooter character so that we can easily access the weapon from this point. Pull out the character node, then cast it to the shooter character. Store a reference in a variable. I'll be calling it shooter character. Open up some space. First, we're going to copy the weapon's position from weapon R, as previously mentioned. The weapon's position will be on this bone, so we need to copy its position to our virtual bone hand R2 AK handgun, which will be the source of our positioning later on. Before copying the location, I'd like to stabilize the character's head, because as you can clearly see, it remains extremely crooked, and this could significantly affect our perspective. However, this adjustment is only necessary when in first-person view. Search for modify bone, set head as the bone, then hide both the location and scale. Change the rotation mode from ignore to replace existing, and then change the Y value to 90. This should properly correct the rotation of our head. You can see that the head has stabilized. Again, I emphasize this is only necessary in first person, no need to do it in third person. Okay, before we move on to positioning the virtual bone hand R, as I mentioned earlier, we need to correct the weapon's orientation. This is explained in more detail within the documentation, so feel free to take a look at it. But essentially, we'll navigate to our weapons mesh. Right-click, then select Create, Anim Blueprint, and then name it BP Rifle. It's a very straightforward setup. You just need to place local ref for an empty pose, prepare nothings, and then search for modify. Here, we'll select the bone that is highest up in the hierarchy. Hide the change the translation, rotation, and scale. Add to existing in rotation mode and we'll set -90 on the z-axis. This corrected the orientation. Our weapon is now pointing towards positive X, which indicates that it's pointing forward. All weapons must point towards positive X for the most stable result possible. Here I'll be selecting this animation blueprint for both of the weapon meshes, the BP rifle, and also for the third person mesh as well. This should properly rotate our weapon, which is currently pointing towards the X-axis, exactly as we had expected. Alright, now we can proceed to copy the location. Please search for copy bone. I'll be hiding all of the pins and only marking translation and rotation as the source. Make sure to check weapon R and target hand R. 2 AK handgun, which will be our primary source for positioning. And finally, this is basically the base setup for positioning the VB hand R2 AK handgun bone. I will be opening up a bit more space as we will start utilizing the plugin's anim nodes, the first of them being procedural bone rebase. This node is responsible for correcting the positioning of the bones that will perform the procedural movements. Set our hand R2 AK handgun as the source and the target pivot. This pivot refers to the bone we are already attaching our weapon to, so this should change how it will be seen, right? The positioning seems almost perfect to me, with just a slight offset here. We'll fix this right away. Before we continue, I want to apply our in offset, so the weapon will follow our camera. It's quite simple, just add the anim node, procedural in offset, at the end of our flow. It already comes with a setup that's sufficient for us. It will automatically look for the calculated camera rotation and rotate our entire field spine here. Alright, that looks good to me, with no noticeable delay. We can debug our animation blueprint and see how it turns out. Now let's apply some type of movement. Search for procedural motion. This is the main anim node of our plugin. It will perform the procedural movements on our pivot, where our weapon is attached. Automatically, the arms and elbows will follow this pivot since they're virtual bones, children of it. You'll understand soon. For the input, we need a very simple structure. For this, I'll create a function to return it. Name it getProceduralMotionInput. Set it to be pure const thread safe, and then add an output with the name return value. This is extremely important, and set the type as procedural motion inputs. To set up and make procedural motion input, our documentation details how it works, how this structure functions. However, basically, source actors are the additional actors from which we want the procedural motion to read the components. These components are what will perform the procedural movements. Automatically, the procedural motion reads the components that are present on our character, so we can place components here. However, I also want to place components on the weapons so that I can customize each weapon. So in order for the weapon to be readable, I will have to put a make array here and point to the actor of our weapon. Look for property access. I'll be looking for shooter character current weapon, so place it right here. This particular value essentially indicates whether we are in first-person perspective or not. If necessary, because we might need to disable certain procedural motion components depending on the camera's perspective, if that makes sense. Feel free to fill this in however you like, but I'll personally be using is locally controlled. If I am the one controlling the character, it means I am currently in first person. So look for shooter character is locally controlled. The aim state doesn't need to be filled in for now. Pivot offset is also optional. We'll be talking about these in the next tutorial. Go back to procedural motion, right-click on input, binding, and click on our function. Finally, set bone rotator modifier as our pivot. Let's see how it turned out. Initially, there shouldn't be any difference, but we'll add a sway component to our rifle, to our weapon base. Search for sway, select the first one, and I'll name it procedural sway motion component. The configuration is optional. It already comes with the default setup. Here we can see how to disable it in some perspectives. That's why that boolean I mentioned is important, this one. I'll leave it enabled. Let's see how it turned out. We can see that the weapon is moving, but the hands are not. This is expected. The only thing missing for the hands to follow the pivot is a hand IK. Let's open up a bit more space at the end of in offset and search for hand IK. Place the procedural hand IK. This is an animation node from our plugin as well. It has already configured the hand IK as needed. Just fill in the bones. For hand L, set it as hand L. Target hand L as pivot hand L. For lower arm, I will be placing the pivot lower arm L.
The same applies to the right.
However, before testing, one detail was still missing. In the procedural bone rebase, we need to reset the position of the virtual bones of the hand and the elbow. Add 4 entries. For the first, set hand R and target as pivot hand R, the same for the left hand. And now the elbows, lower arm L and pivot lower arm L. Done. That should be enough. We can see that the arms have corrected. Sounds good to me. Now let's correct this positioning. As it's mentioned in the documentation, we cannot add an offset. Generally, games, when attaching, use a relative location and rotation or a relative transform, but this cannot be done for the plugin to function.
Yes, we should do this through a transform bone, which is completely common. So previously we created these variables, so we will use them for this.
Attach relative location and rotation. You simply need to place it after the positioning copy bone, then create another modify bone and place the hand R bone.
and can hit the skill property. For translation mode, shimei bom que depois beijo mo choose demo cat to existing call. For translation space, so bug go beat shimei so que no select that bone space. Always apply the same for rotation. Then click the translation pin and search for the shooter character's current weapon. Attach relative location, and for rotation, the shooter character's current weapon. Attach relative rotation, there you go. Previously, I set the attach relative rotation to -4, but if you don't change it, it would look like this. Just set it to -4, and that should correct the rotation. Feel free to change the other values. You can put any offset you want here. Copy this value and set it as the rifle's standard default. For class defaults here, enter -4. Now we have some sway. I would like to configure a little bit of sway, so we're going to create the preset data for this rifle. Go to the blueprint location, right click and go to miscellaneous data asset and search for preset data select. I will give it the name PD rifle. I'll be adding two preset configurations here, one for preset sway and the other for preset offset. I'll leave it as default for now, and I'll select this data asset, our procedural sway, here within our rifle's BP, and in the shooter weapon base, I'll be adding a new component called offset. Procedural offset motion. Let's go back to the rifle. Now we have the offset. Do the same thing and then select our preset data. There you go. With this, we'll be able to configure our weapon in real time. Let's correct the weapon's orientation. In this case, -4 shouldn't be here, but the middle one. Now the orientation is correct, so we can fix it. I'll copy this value and put it back as the rifle's default value, like this, and done. Now yes, we'll be able to configure the offset and sway in real time. Open the preset data without closing the playing editor. Here I'd like to change the pivot a bit. It's -40, I'll set it to -10.
Alright, a little bit more pleasant, wouldn't you say?
And the offset motion. I'd like to position the weapon a bit closer to the body. Feel free to position it however you like. And a bit more to the center, a rotation. Alright, this is now persistent. Now we have an offset and sway on the weapon, quite easily and simply. That's all for this tutorial. Stay tuned for the next tutorial where we'll be adding the remaining procedural motion components, integrating with recoil and more. We'll be configuring both the rifle and the pistol. Thank you for watching until now.